around the room.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Tony Grimes. I'm District Councillor.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Alec Bastard. I'm a Fairfax Ward Councillor.
I'm the council's landscape officer.
Good morning, Mike Hill, Somerset Tree Services.
My name's Colin Coles.
Morning, I'm Robert Jervis. I've lived at Branchflag Cottage for
Large Law Sport and Legal Advisor to the panel. Well, committee and chairman of this. Basically, the procedure that will follow today, I'll just quickly. Once that report has been given, there's an opportunity. We'll then come to yourselves as supporters and objectors on certain. Again, if you give your presentation, following that, there'll be an opportunity. Beyond that, then move on to a closing statement from each of those parties again. So from the land. On so if we make a start, I think probably the best is, as we say, to start with Bert and you.
Today we're considering one objection received from three owners of the property. The reason the order was prior to the serving of the order, assess the tree, that the tree was in order to set a standard assessment, the importance and judge desirability for inclusion and areas of potential conflict associated with the noted that the tree can be clearly seen from Tech Hill Lane and the public way footpath Bridgewater 2376. So I undertook an amenity evaluation assessment in the appendix, and if I just run through that. So we have to take into consideration certain factors and criteria. Number one is the size of the tree, and it's a large tree. That's the volume of the canopy that we use in that sense. 6 points for that. The particular species, Sycamore, probably had another life expectancy. I did notice that the form of the tree, looking at the form, it had I gave it an average form because it's twin stemmed and stems are rising about 1 metre from the base of the tree. Possibly has been pollarded in the past, which is why it's why it's forms the way it is. In terms of its visibility, it is visible, as I previously said, from the public right of way and from the lane running up to the property. But it is located in the back garden and it's slightly blocked by other features I can see. So I gave it 2 points for that. There are other trees in the area. I did score it only 1 point for that because it's hedgerow trees growing and other garden trees. So I would consider that in terms of the character of this particular tree, it's quite an individual specimen, not just a tree located in the hedgerow. It merits on it. It merits on its individual amenity. Suitability to the area, I would say it's fairly suitable. It's the sort of tree that you would find in this location, being a native tree. Its future amenity value, again, medium potential points. And then looking at the influence on structures, the tree is fairly close to the property, and the canopy does extend towards the property. I felt that it was a reasonable distance away, not to dominate the property as such. So I scored it slight, which is total. The total amenity evaluation rating totals 18 points, and I apologise that there was an error on the form which says 19 points. It is actually 18 points. So the sycamore tree has been protected on the basis that it's publicly visible, achieved an amenity score that merited protection, and the tree has a reasonable relationship to the adjoining property. The order was served, and then we received, as you know, grounds of objection. And that can you not hear me? So grounds of objection, these are set out in a letter received from the owners of the property, and they included the following. Sycamores, whilst common, are not an indigenous species, having been introduced originally from Europe. A reference book, Trees of Britain and Europe, by B. Press and D. Hosking, describes sycamores as very fast-growing and invasive. Accordingly, it seems inappropriate for them to be protected. The tree, whilst large and prominent, is a poor specimen, having only a short trunk being divided into a number of limbs. The haphazard positioning of the tree suggests it was self-set rather than being deliberately planted. Growth has extended very close to Branchflower Cottage, with a consequent risk of damage, particularly to the roof of the property. The tree has, of course, continued to grow in the past 2 years. There is also potential for damage to persons and property in the garden should the tree itself or major limbs fall, especially bearing in mind recent trends for very strong winds. The tenant made a request to the landowners to reduce the spread of the tree, and advice was taken from a tree surgeon. The work was planned to be carried out in January 2020, and the tenant was notified. Whilst it is acknowledged that a TPO does not necessarily prevent work to subject trees, it does impose limits and the requirement to follow procedures. The sequence of events set out earlier shows that intended timely action by the owners can be inhibited and delayed. Previous events show that landowners have demonstrated a willingness to take a responsible approach to the management of this tree. They wish to have the freedom to do so without being subject to the restraints and procedures associated with the TPO. The landowners therefore object to the current TPO and request that it be set aside. So in response to these grounds, I revisited the site to assess the tree again, taking into consideration the reasons for objecting to the order as stated. It was noted that the tree divides into several main stems at a height of approximately 1 to 1.5 metres from the base of the trunk. Despite there being tight unions of the stems, the tree, in my opinion, is unlikely to be unsafe, and there was no evidence to suggest that there was significant decay occurring at the fork junctions. Difficult to establish whether the tree was self-seeded or planted in its current position. Sycamores are often regarded as invasive species, fast-growing species, particularly when growing in woodland areas where they can quickly regenerate and suppress other native species. This particular tree is being considered for protection for its individual merit and cannot be classed as an invasive in this instance. The canopy of the tree is now extending towards Branch Flower Cottage. However, it's considered that there is a reasonable distance between the tree and the dwelling, and that it can be sensitively managed should any conflict between the lateral growth and the dwelling occur in the future. It is appreciated that the concerns being raised regarding the potential for branch loss during inclement weather conditions. The tree has been recently inspected following recent high winds and storms, and it does not appear to have suffered any branch loss within the crown or structural damage in the main stems. Should the tree require pruning in the future, such as thinning out the crown of the tree to reduce the sail effect of the canopy or reducing heavy extended lateral growth, then this can be discussed at a pre-application meeting with the owner or their appointed tree surgeon prior to submission of an application. I would say that an application doesn't require a fee either. Although the sycamore is regarded as a common species of trees, orders can be served on all species of trees and do not exclude those species which have been introduced into this country. In fact, many of our protected trees throughout the district are exotic species such as cedars and ginkgo and trees that don't originate in this country. Confirming this order would guarantee the retention of the sycamore tree that's been identified for protection, and any subsequent surgery will have to be carried out in the interest of good arboricultural practice to the appropriate British standard for tree works. All surgery will be controlled by the local planning authority, which ensure it is carried out to a professional standard in order to retain the tree's health, biodiversity, contribution to climate change and amenity value.
Right.
Thank you, yeah, has there been any, sign of subsidence at all in this cottage over the years, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
I think you said under the life expectancy. 4 points to this expected.
Yeah,
Sycamore.
yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, you'll see at the bottom typical useful life expectancy of common trees. You know, so U is 300 plus, and 2 to 300. Sycamore is listed in that group of species.
Form, you mentioned the fact that normally
Yes.
for that as a not look as a average form.
Yeah.
So and again,
I think the form that it's in is probably the way it's previously been managed. I mentioned earlier it may have been cut back, but it seems to, the canopy seems to be well balanced, even though it's multi-stemmed. So That's why I gave it average 4.
I'll ask about the effect on structures. And the final comment, in terms of if this were servable, what is the suitability of this type of tree in terms of future maintenance?
Sycamores tend to tolerate pruning very well. They'll regenerate from cut points. But you have to be very careful that you don't over prune it, because it will put on vigorous regrowth, and the points at which it regrows from tend to be weak. So you will get, initially, if you pruned it back very hard, it will respond by putting on vigorous regrowth. And then as that develops and puts on weight, then the points in which you cut it back tend to be quite weak, and in high winds, then they could split out. So it's better to look at probably if you were going to manage it to bring it back away from the property, you would cut it back to a good growing point, but perhaps thin out the canopy to allow the wind to go through the canopy, rather than chopping the top off and reducing the sides hugely, because really you would have to go back continuously on a very regular basis, then keep cutting it back. See what I mean?
Move to the next item, which is in terms of the comments at the start. I mean, Mr. Hill, do you want to make your presentation? Sorry, Mr. Coles. You're the wrong person. Sorry, Mr. Coles. And will you be adding to that? Well, or is it just the one of you who is?
Mr. Coles. I will speak, Mr. Chairman, but there will be a point in what I'm saying, and I will invite the panel to hear Mr. Hill if they'd like to do so.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, thank you for the opportunity of speaking to you today. My name is Colin Coles. I represent the joint owners of Branchflower Cottage, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Hockey, and the Colin Coles Discretionary Trust, of which I'm a trustee. Today with me, Mr. Hill of Somerset Tree Services, a recognised and established local business in tree surgery. The landlords have made representations to the council on both the original TPO, which was subsequently withdrawn, and the more recent one dated the 10th of March this year. Mrs. Burton outlined those objections when she spoke. Have the committee any questions on those grounds? We wish to challenge some aspects of what is said in the letter dated the 26th of June from Mr. and Mrs. Jervis. And in particular, we consider it was inappropriate and unnecessary for Mr. Jervis to inquire of other experts as to whether our proposals were a good idea or correct. The tree forms part of the property, and decisions about its management are for the owners to make, based on professional advice of their choosing. It is understood that the reason for Mr. Hill's second visit was merely to show the proposed works, for which he'd already been given an order, to a colleague of his who would be assisting him. It had nothing to do with costs, an alternative estimate, or any change the extent of the work, and Mr. Hill has kindly agreed to confirm that to you today if you wish to hear from him. There's no necessity for Mr. Jervis to involve himself by approaching the council as he did. Landlords resent him doing this, not merely in the first instance, but in particular what was said in the recent letter at paragraph 7. Attention is what is drawn to what Mr. Jervis said in an apparent undated email at appendix 7.2 as compared with his most recent letter. In the first communication, he presumed incorrectly that the landlords deemed the work to be too expensive. By contrast, in the most recent letter, he asserts, again incorrectly, this is a fact and a reason for Mr. Hill's second visit, which isn't the case. But for Mr. Jervis's intervention, the work would have been done as long ago as January 2020 to the benefit of all concerned. As it is, more than 2 years have now elapsed, during which time the tree will obviously have continued to grow. More work is now likely to be necessary than would have been the case if it had been done in the first instance. Consequently, much time and effort has been wasted by everyone involved. It is regretted that the initial TPO was imposed without consultation with the landlords as the owners of the property. Had such discussions taken place, it may well have been possible to resolve matters at that stage, thereby avoiding the current situation. In conclusion, the landlords wish to maintain and reiterate all that's been said in their statement of objections. In particular, draw councillors' attention to the 2 final bullet points once again. If, as is hoped, consideration may be given to the withdrawal of this TPO, the landlords will give an undertaking to obtain further updated advice about appropriate works to the tree. If they do so, I'd like to make on the scoring, which the chairman has already said something about, but I think some of the things you said, and again for the opportunity of speaking. Well, if you look at the scoring sheet that you made some reference to, I'm not a tree expert, which is, and lots of this must be subjective. I query whether this tree has another. That being the case, I think the score of 4 is excessive and probably really the form of the tree is a poor specimen. Despite what's been said, it has got forks in it. The reasons for that are unknown. Specimen. The score there, I think, is too high as well. Second column, number 6, assessed as fairly suitable, just suitable or only suitable, so therefore a further reduction to that score would seem appropriate to me. In terms of number 7, so a score of 0 is appropriate. On the structure. Slide. Assessment of those figures is correct. That reduces the score then, I believe, to 14.
There's just one point of clarification. Our subsequent visit to the property to assess the work. Well, to familiarise my client with the job in hand, ensure the correct amount of time and team had been allocated. This is normal procedure. We discussed the work with Mr. Jervis, along with the disposal of some of the arisings. Whilst Dean and I did discuss various alternatives, as is commonly, especially the if this was my tree scenario, it did not constitute any change in the plan. At no time was this implied.
All I would say on that is we understand obviously there is a history to got to an application for a TPO. All I would say in terms of the role of the panel, we're here to consider the the tree itself and its impact on the landscape. We do understand, obviously, there is history as to how we've got here. Literally, what we're looking at is merits of the tree and whether it deserves to have this, as opposed to how we got to the application for a TPO being looked at. But we do understand that obviously both sides will have views as to how we got here in the first place. But as I said, we'll be assessing particularly the merits of the tree and the merits of having a TPO. Is there any questions that you have for the speakers? Mr. Osborne, is there anything that you wanted to ask or? Thank you very much. Jovis, if we come to yourself again, if you'd like to make your presentation. Thank you.
I don't know whether you've all read the letter I sent on the 26th of June, whether it's included in the agenda pack. But in case you haven't, I'm just going to read out some questions if you like. I wish to take this opportunity to explain why I asked Sedgemoor District Council to apply a tree preservation order to the sycamore tree in my garden. I've lived in this cottage for 38 years and, God willing, I hope to be here for another 20 years. The tree is at least 60 years old and is 60 feet high. It's very prominent in the landscape, being visible for miles around. It's one of a very few large trees in this area, which until the 70s was dominated by many large elm trees. No sycamores present in the hedgerows here, even a seedling. Clearly, the tree would have been deliberately planted as a rare species in this spot, for there would have been no other sycamore trees for it to have seeded from at that time. This magnificent tree supports a myriad of life forms. It's alive with insects and feeding birds at this time of year. Goldfinches nest in it, and linnets, chaffinches, song thrushes, missel thrushes, great-spotted and green woodpeckers, stock and collared doves are among the many species which feed on it. It's used for rest and roosting by tawny and little owls, kestrels, buzzards, peregrine falcons, and this year we had a red kite roosting. I should like to put right some of the missing details in Mr. Cole's version of events leading up to my request for a TPO on the tree. In the summer of 2019, I suggested to the landlord that it might be an idea to get an expert to check the large sycamore for safety reasons. Mr. Coles brought Mike Hill to inspect it and see if he thought it needed any surgery. He suggested that it needed an all-round 30% reduction in its girth. Coles asked him to draw up an estimate of this, with a view to carrying out the work in January in 2020. I made inquiries from several experts as to whether this was a good idea for a procedure. A few weeks later, I had a call from Mike Hill to ask if he could pop by and have another look at the tree. Came my colleague. It transpired that his quote had been too expensive for the landlord, and he had been instructed to provide an estimate for cutting the whole tree down to a height of 12 feet. I thought this was outrageous and contacted Janet Burton at STD as soon as I could, with a view to seeing if a TPO could be put on the tree, as it was now in immediate danger of being destroyed. I'm not opposed to proper surgery being performed on the tree, but it clearly needs to be properly supervised and agreed by experts. Otherwise, there's a very real possibility that the landlords will just chop it down. This last winter, we had the fiercest storm since 1990. We lost one of our large apple trees. I watched the sycamore tree being buffeted by the incredible winds of Storm Eustace. At no point was I worried that any limbs might fall from it. Clearly a strong tree, and there's no rot in it. I hope the committee will see fit to protect this wonderful tree.
Before I come to reiterate, as I said, we're here to look at the merits of the tree. I understand there is a difference of view as to how we got to the application, what the motive. That's not part of what we will be considering today. Members of the panel, any Thank you very much. So that then, as they we come to what's the sort of summing up opportunity for each of the speakers. So if we could start with Ms. Burton, if you'd like to. Help, I think, the members too.
Okay, so Mr. Coles has varied some of the scoring, and what the one of them was the life expectancy of the tree. I mean, this is just an expectancy. I mean, you can't guarantee that the tree, you can't put an actual date on how long it's going to last. But I didn't think it was unreasonable if the tree is managed appropriately to suggest that the tree, had another 100 years left in it. In the guide that we're given, it can live up to 200 years, and I don't see any reason why this tree shouldn't carry on if it's managed appropriately. Also, you said that you feel that the form of the tree, you feel that it's not a very good form. Although the tree is multi-stemmed, lots of trees are multi-stemmed, and I felt that it was average for its type, really, particularly due to the way it's been managed in the past. I didn't feel that the structure of the branches within the canopy, although I admit it has multi-stemmed, within the canopy itself, it's well balanced. I didn't feel that it was a poor form at all. That's why I scored it as an average form of 1. The other thing was you felt that it was only just suitable for the area, and it only scored, you felt it should only score 1 point. I thought it was fairly suitable. I wouldn't be surprised to find sycamore in this area, being a native tree. The other thing was the influence on the structure. I mean, no evidence was presented to suggest that the tree was actually causing damage to the property itself. No structural reports or no impact on drainage runs or surfaces, and I couldn't see any surfaces or any that the canopy was impacting on the roof of the property, and I felt that because it was, in my opinion, sited a reasonable distance away from the property, I didn't feel that it over dominated the property, and that's why I said that it had a slight impact, and therefore I scored it as an 0.
We then come to Mr. Coles, for you to make your comments.
So it didn't address what I said.
Did I ask you to turn your microphone on?
I beg your pardon.
That's all right, no problem.
Tree officer didn't address what I said about number 7. And in an earlier comment, she justified the sycamore being included as a tree preservation and compared with other exotic trees, like etc. Accept what you say about the sequence of events that led up to this, that we intended to do some work to the tree. We advice from our knowledge, local experts. It was going to be done accordingly. It saw fit to involve the council, had he not. So the work would have been done. Tree preservation order need to be formed or imposed, and we need to be here today. So That's it. And the other thing is to say that, you know, the first approach here was from Mr. Jervis. Something about it. And we feel we've been responsible, but we do feel we're now being penalised for that, for exhibiting a responsible attitude. Except that you know, you're making mistakes for the tree. None of us would be here today. It's what I've described to you.
Very much.
Yeah, can I just say that we wouldn't be here today if Colin was taking the responsible attitude and asked Jeanette how they should deal with it. That's if you put a TP on it, you can do it. It's not that nothing can be done on it. It's that it would not be cut down to 12 feet. So thank you, Colin, for also being here. The tree itself, it divides into two at about a metre. And then much further up, it divides again. So you haven't got 4 or 5 limbs coming straight out of the 1 metre. So it's very sound, very solid.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for any of the speakers at this point?
No, I don't think so.
No. Yeah, just perhaps Mr. Jeeves could just clarify. Have you seen any evidence of damage or cause and effect from the tree in your time occupying the cottage?
No, as I said, I've been there 38 years. The tree was fairly big then. I did, for the record, it's not really relevant, I did speak to the previous landlord about it when it was much smaller, saying that they do grow, but nothing was on there. But no, I see there's been no damage to it. There's no, you know, obviously there's lots of leaves. But there's no, even small branches haven't come up. Great. Get birds up there. Very, very sound tree.
No evidence of problems from roots.
Quite a vacant land.
Highlight, obviously, as part of this, actually visited the site. We went down the highway and public vantage points, but we did, which is certainly quite. As I say, we had a look at it from both the lane and also walked along the public right of way. That we're looking at it in was viewed from that within. We come to members then. If I can ask you for your start with Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. After listening to the presentation from all concerned, and after a site visit, I concluded that objection to the TPO is not proved. And in this particular case, I agree with the officer to put a TPO order on this tree.
The same opinion as Councillor Grimes.
I think as has been said throughout the discussion today, I mean, this is a substantial tree. It certainly does have a major impact on the landscape. It's mentioned, I think, by a number of speakers. Video is confirmed on this. It does not preclude action. Benefit of the tree. So I think, again, as my colleagues have said, based on where we are, I think boring. There is some view, obviously, that there may be on 1 or 2 items. I think I would tend to agree. But again, it wouldn't be enough to change it, in my view, to below the merits. And in terms of form, I do understand the issue about the split. But having viewed the tree from a distance and fairly close, the form of the canopy certainly is sheet. Yeah. My own view would be as the others. But at that point, then I say, well, I'll confirm based on the votes of the three members. I'll look for a proposal actually for what has been suggested. Ground you're proposing,
I am proposing that, Chairman.
Councillor Bestford.
I'll take that.
Okay, so if we can just take formally a vote of those in support of that recommendation, please show. Clearly carried, so the order is to be confirmed. Thank you all very much for your time this morning, and again, sorry for the technical issues and the delays